Welcome to the Fantasy Forecast. I'm John Romero of the Washington Post. It is week 8 of the NFL season, so lots to get to. We've got guys to plug in all over the place because we've got 6 teams on bye weeks. We've got injuries, we've got depth issues. I'm here to help as much as I can. If you want to follow me on Twitter or seek out some advice, my handle is at John_J_Romero. A real quick recap of my week 7 exploits. Not so good. My long shot was Orleans Darkwa. That didn't pan out. My fringe starters, a couple guys, Joe Mixon and C.J. Anderson, didn't do much. And the only guy I can really tout from last week was Nelson Aguilar, who continues his fine season with the Philadelphia Eagles. Turning our attention to Week 8, who is on the fringe this week? Well, Ted Ginn Jr. is a possible option out there for owners. Now, he's strictly a matchup play, but for those of you in need of somebody in your receiving core, you got depth issues, you got bye weeks, maybe somebody's injured, Ginn Jr. is at least someone who has upside. He's only had 27 targets on the year, but he's hauled in 22 of them. In the last 2 weeks, he's tallied 200 yards receiving. Now, New Orleans has had some injury issues in the receiving core. Willie Snead is just now coming back this week after being out some time, so he should be on the field. But Michael Thomas missed practice Wednesday with a knee injury. While he probably ends up suiting up, point is, Ginn Jr. has carved out a nice little rapport with Breeze, who loves to spread the ball around. And with the Bears, while they've been very impressive defensively, they're going to be on the road, and they have tended to have some issues with some of the secondary and third options of opposing wideouts. So that bodes well for Ginn Jr. as well. Either way, if you have some issues, he's worth a shot just because he has that upside. Waiver wires are getting thinner and thinner as we go on, but Ginn Jr. at least has some upside, and so owners in need of a play with all the buys and injuries and maybe depth issues, Ginn Jr. has some upside and is worth a look. Now, my favorite fringe play this week is Dion Lewis of the New England Patriots. 13 carries last week for 76 yards. He's now played more snaps the last 2 weeks than Mike Elusi, and he's generally going to be the main ball carrier, it looks like, from this point on, as long as he doesn't put the ball on the ground or, obviously gets banged up. But New England is steadily looking toward him to be the main rusher. He's not going to ever catch a lot of passes. That kind of role belongs to James White. But, if New England actually starts playing like New England and maybe has some leads in ball games and whatnot, that is going to bode well for Lewis down the stretch too. Plus we got, winter is coming, and the weather is probably going to bode well for, a few more carries during those games that, throwing the ball is a little bit more difficult. Either way, this week New England plays Chargers. Chargers on a 3-game winning streak, and actually held in check Denver rushing game last week, despite the fact that I touted C.J. Anderson because San Diego has been very bad against the run. Still 31st, not dead last, but still 31st, thanks to a solid week in Week 7. But can they do that 2 weeks in a row? I'm going to take my chances. Lewis is one of my favorite players as far as, one of those borderline plays. I think he's one of my favorite plays in that respect this week. So if you got a flex spot, RB2 that needs filled, Lewis is probably, if he can keep this workload up, has a chance to become at least a weekly consideration for most owners. So at this point, I think he's a nice play this weekend. Now, do I have any long shot plays this weekend? I do, and it's kind of a twofold answer. I mentioned last week in my column that Detroit's receiving core was a little banged up. Golden Tate, while he did get on the practice field Wednesday, it'd be very, very surprising if Tate is on the field for Sunday night's matchup at home against the Steelers. Now, it's not a terrific matchup on paper either, but Detroit obviously plays better at home, doesn't necessarily have a strong run game, so it's kind of going to be on Stafford. So I feel even in a win or a loss that Detroit, if they're going to move the ball, it's going to be primarily through the air. So where does that leave us if Tate isn't on the field? Marvin Jones becomes your number 1 option. And so who are the number 2 and number 3 options? Those are the guys I'm kind of looking at as my long shot plays this week. One of those should be Kenny Golladay. He's been battling a hamstring injury, but he made it onto the practice field this week. So he should be the number 2 option as far as the depth chart, assuming Tate does not make the field. Now, the guy that got some playing time a couple weeks ago because Golladay was injured and Tate was forced out of the game was T.J. Jones. Got about 9 targets, hauled in 3, and while from a fantasy perspective, didn't necessarily make an impact. Now, with a full game and full set of snaps and a couple weeks of practice, he could be a guy who kind of flies under the radar and is probably barely owned in any of your leagues. So if you're just looking for someone to take a flyer on and absolutely need someone who needs to get in your lineup because you got injuries or a depth, or have someone on a bye, then Galladay and Jones of the Lions are kind of the guys I'm looking at as long shot plays this week. Now, that's going to do it for us on this edition of the Fantasy Forecast. Again, I'm John Romero of the Washington Post. Tune in next week for Week 9, and we'll see how much help we can provide. Until then, good luck.